Hey everybody, John Wagnon here with Dev Central, and we are bringing you another Lightboard lesson video. Today we're going to talk about TLS 1.3. This is the protocol that's used between client and server in encrypted communication on the internet today. So before we get into the specifics of TLS 1.3, I wanted to highlight a report that was just released by our awesome F5 Labs security research team. They do all kinds of great security research, threat analysis, that kind of stuff. And they wrote this report. It's called the 2017 TLS Telemetry Report. And it goes over a ton of different security-related stuff, but it's, of course, centered around TLS. And it gives you statistics on things like, what versions of TLS, SSL are out there in the wild today. I'll give you a little teaser from the report, and I'll link to it, by the way, but did you know that like 11% of hosts out there in the internet today still use SSL version 3.0, which in today's day and age, this is 2018, that is like ancient history. That is crazy outdated, insecure stuff. In fact, it's even prohibited by the IETF, SSL 3.0, but 11% of you people out there are still using it. Things like TLS 1.2, which is the latest before TLS 1.3, of course, 89% of hosts use TLS 1.2. 81% of communications across the internet today are encrypted with HTTPS, with SSL TLS, with something. All right, so it's things like that. It's a fascinating report. It shows you all kinds of different stuff. So get out there and check that out. In light of that, we wanted to talk about this new version, TLS 1.3. TLS 1.2 has been around for a long time, and there is a kind of a philosophical debate, if you will, about whether TLS 1.2 is even broken enough to need to be replaced or not. But nonetheless, the organization, the IETF, the Internet Engineering Task Force, who governs all this stuff, released or just recently approved TLS 1.3. All right, so again, the TLS protocol is a protocol, and it defines the way that the client and server on the internet communicate. So I'm going to draw just a very quick representation of the TLS handshake up here, and then we'll use that to kind of talk a little bit today. So you have client over here, and then you have server over here, and then you have what is considered or what is called the TLS handshake, and that is the way that the client and the server exchange encryption keys to be able to ultimately encrypt all their communication and make it secure. So the client sends a message to the server. This is a hello message, and then the server responds with stuff. This is a very simplified version, but basically the server responds with a hello, plus a lot of stuff. And then ultimately, you arrive down here at what we'll call application data. And I'm going to put a little lock on that because that stuff, once you go through this little key exchange and cipher, coordination and agreement and all that stuff, then ultimately you land down here with encrypted application data between client and server. Okay, so one of the critical, I guess I should say there are a couple of critical things to talk about with respect to TLS 1.3, and I'm going to break them into two kind of primary categories, and these are the things that TLS 1.3 brings to us that maybe TLS 1.2 or even previous versions did not have. And the two major categories that I'll list up here are performance and security. So here's performance, and then security. All right, so on the performance side, as the IETF went through, hey, if we're gonna create this new protocol, this TLS 1.3, it better be better than the old protocol, of course. And one of the things that they talked about was this performance issue, and we'll go back here quickly to client and server. Whenever the client sends encryption information or key information or cipher and all that kind of stuff over to the server, and then the server sends back, they've got to chunk through all this stuff, and they got to calculate encryption keys, and it gets kind of clunky and computationally expensive, as it were. And so the IETF said, hey, we need to make sure that that's as fast as we can possibly make it. for, especially in today's day and age, for things like mobile phone experiences. I mean, every one of us, it seems like, has a mobile phone, and to ask our little, mobile phone to do all these complex calculations gets a little crazy sometimes. So with that in mind, what they wanted to do is have a shorter, and I'm just going to put this up here, shorter handshake. All right, so what used to be a fairly sophisticated back and forth between the client and the server. Client, hello, it offers up cipher suites. The server would send back a certificate, and say this is the cipher suite that I, agreed to. And then each of them have to calculate the keys, and then they send these change cipher spec messages back and forth, and then they have to encrypt certain things, and then they finally land down here at application data. But it was a bunch of back and forth. Now, there is a much shorter handshake that happens. It's basically the client says, hey, hello, server, sends some bits and pieces of information. The server gets that, sends all of the pieces of information it needs to send, and then they just start encrypting stuff. So it's a much quicker flow through the handshake process. All right, so shorter handshake. The other one that I'll put up here is I'm going to put a 0 and then RTT. That's 0 round trip time. And that actually goes back to the shorter handshake. And this is in a session resumption situation. So imagine if a client has already established communications with a server. They've already established a session. They've already got the session key, and it's encrypted, or the communication is encrypted, all that stuff. Let's say, for example, that client does what it needs to do on that web server, and then it's the session is now no longer valid. Then if that client comes back to the server and says, hey, I was shopping on your website or whatever. Now I'm not shopping for a minute. Now I'm coming back. I want to shop again, kind of thing. So now it needs to establish another secure communication with that server. The idea behind 0 round trip time is that the client can say, hey server, do you remember me? I was here a little while ago. We did this whole shopping experience, and I gave you the encryption capability or the encryption keys and all that stuff. Why don't we reuse some of that stuff and let's make this whole, encryption handshake thing go much, much faster than it would have needed to in previous versions of TLS. So basically, the client can say, server, hello, I'm going to send you some little bits of information that you might need to resume the session that we had before. And then I'm going to go ahead and send like my first GET request or my first bit of, hey, let me access your website. And then the server, when it gets that, it can say, oh yeah, I remember that guy, I remember that client. So let me calculate the encryption keys that would need to be calculated, and let me respond to the GET request, and let's just go ahead and start doing this thing. So basically, there's not even a complete round trip that needs to happen, so the client can send some of its application request with its initial hello, as it were, in this session resumption. All right. The bottom line on all this is that the handshaking between the client and the server is significantly reduced now. So what that equates to then, if you're a mobile user or if you have a desktop or laptop, whatever, then when you go to access a web page, the web page is going to respond much quicker than it used to if it did not use TLS 1.3. So theoretically, as we move forward and as more and more web servers and more clients adopt TLS 1.3, then you will start to see faster response times on web pages, which everybody loves that, right? One interesting thing about the 0 round trip time that I will mention, though, is it is susceptible to what we call a replay attack, and that is if you have a man in the middle or a attacker bad guy that can actually grab some of the client information and hold on to that, then that attacker could impersonate the client and say, hey, server, here's another GET request, or here's another request to your web application. Then the server theoretically could then respond back to that, what would be an attacker replaying that client request. And then, and it could serve up the web page that would have been requested. For some examples, that's maybe not such a big deal. If you're transferring data, or I'm sorry, not transferring data, if you're transferring money from your bank account, or if you're deleting a database entry, or you can imagine that could be a problem, of course. So the IETF actually addresses this in the write-up of the RFC for TLS 1.3, and they essentially say that it's up to the server ultimately to be configured properly to deal with this problem. So server, if you get a replay attack, you need to be configured properly in order to handle that properly. So if you're a server, a web server administrator, or you're a web developer or that kind of thing, then design your web applications in such a way that you are not susceptible to replay attacks. That's what the IETF would tell you. That's what they are going to tell you and have told you in this write-up. Okay, so performance increased with TLS 1.3. From a security perspective, there are several things to note. I'm going to put old ciphers. Goodness, that's not good penmanship. Ciphers removed, all right? And so basically anything that they considered, they being the IETF, considered legacy or ciphers that have been problematic and, from a historical perspective that have been susceptible to attacks or that kind of thing, those have been removed to now, of course, favor newer cipher sets and cipher strings that are stronger and not susceptible to attacks. With that, there's this thing called AEAD ciphers, and every cipher set now that's approved for TLS 1.3 is AEAD ciphers. Stay tuned, by the way. We're going to do another light board on AEAD ciphers, like what does that even mean? What are those things? So we'll give you a little teaser there. Stay tuned. We'll do one of those. There is also messages are encrypted after the server hello comes back from the server. Everything after that. So I'm going to put server hello plus encrypted. Encrypted. All right. So basically, what I'm saying there is everything after the server hello is encrypted in the TLS handshake. Like I said, there's a bunch of stuff here that I did not include. Key exchange information and some of that kind of stuff that used to not have to be encrypted. Now it is going to be encrypted if as you use TLS 1.3. All right, there is a version. I'll say version negotiation. Version negotiation, and basically what this and actually I'm going to put version negotiation removed. What you used to be able to do is negotiate what version of TLS or SSL that you wanted to use between client and server. So, hey, client says, hey, server, here's my cipher suites that I want to offer up. I'm saying hello. I want to use TLS version 1.2 or 1.1 or whatever it is. And so you would have this method of negotiating what version of TLS that you would want to use. What this opened up, though, is a susceptibility to what we call a downgrade attack. If you guys remember the poodle attack, that's basically what this would do. It would say, hey, I am going to step in, me being attacker bad guy, I'm going to step in and force the server to downgrade to SSL 3.0, which, by the way, if you listened earlier, 11% of you people are still using that based on our TLS telemetry report. So for 11% of you, we don't even have to make you downgrade. But nonetheless, it's an attack where you would say, hey, server, let's downgrade to a lower or more vulnerable version of SSL. And then the server would do that. And then that would open up a lot of possibilities then for the attacker to, attack and hack into your system and just all that kind of stuff. All right, so with version negotiation removed now, then there is, it basically makes that a more secure interaction between client and server. So anyway, so that is also out. And then the final thing that I'll put up here, it's 3 big letters, PFS, Perfect Forward Secrecy is what that is. We have a light board on that as well. This is probably one of the most important things of TLS 1.3, and that is that Perfect Forward Secrecy now is required for this whole handshake thing, which basically means that like the RSA version of key exchange, that whole thing is not going to be able to be used anymore. One of the significant byproducts of that is whenever you used to use RSA, or obviously a lot of people still do it today, But in an RSA implementation, you would have a private key on the server, and then you have a public key that the server would serve out, of course. But that private key would stay static. And what that allowed you to do is you could say, hey, if I've got clients coming into my web application and I want to send them to like a data loss prevention mechanism, or maybe I want to send them to a intrusion detection or intrusion prevention mechanism to kind of check things out before they ever get to my web application, then you could still encrypt that entire thing between client and server, but you could share your private key from your server out to those trusted places like an IPS or IDS or whatever. And then that service or that feature could take the encrypted client data, it could decrypt it with the private key. It could check it all out. If everything's good, it sends it on back to your web application. Well, now with Perfect Forward Secrecy, you cannot do that. You cannot share the private key out with all these different people because there is a new and unique private key for every single session between client and server. So we actually have a light board on Perfect Forward Secrecy, so we can link to that as well. But you need to understand that this creates a very interesting problem that we collectively are going to need to start to figure out and solve. So anyway, so that is one of the key elements of TLS 1.3. Perfect Forward ciphers are required now. All right, so that's a few things on TLS 1.3. It's an exciting thing. I mean, it's got some really cool new features to it. Like I said, from a performance standpoint, from a security standpoint, we are making steps forward. But it's got some things that we need to be aware of, like Perfect Forward secret ciphers are going to be required now. So, all right. So whether you like it or not, honestly, this is the way that the world is moving, and clients are going to start to adopt TLS 1.3. From a browser perspective, and web servers are going to start to adopt this as well. So this is the way the world is moving. Let's understand it. Let's get on board with it, and then some of those issues that we need to work out. Let's get creative and let's pull our heads together and figure those out as well. So thanks for hanging out with us today to watch this Lightboard lesson video on TLS 1.3. Hey, if you like this, you can click on the DC ball here and subscribe to our YouTube channel, and we will see you guys out there in the community.